At 11:43 p.m. on September 14, 2008, a projectionist named Donald Kemp died alone in his apartment in Silver Lake. He was 89 years old, a lifelong bachelor who'd spent 56 years working in movie theaters across Los Angeles. The paramedics who arrived found him in his bedroom, surrounded by film canisters, hundreds of them, stacked floor to ceiling like a shrine. Most contained unremarkable footage, test shots, B-roll, forgotten commercials from the 1950s. But one canister, locked in a fireproof safe beneath his bed, held something that would change everything we thought we knew about Jean Harlow's final days. The film was labeled in faded ink, J.H. Private, May 29, 1937. That was the day Jean collapsed on the set of Saratoga, 9 days before her death. Donald's nephew, sorting through the estate, almost threw the canister away. Instead, he took it to a film preservation specialist. When they projected it onto a screen 3 weeks later, both of them stood in silence for 20 minutes after it ended. On that grainy, damaged footage, Jean Harlow was speaking directly to the camera, not performing, not acting, but confessing. And what she said contradicted every official account of her final days. May 1937. Jean Harlow was dying, though almost nobody knew how close to the end she actually was. She'd been working on Saratoga for weeks, struggling through scenes despite crushing fatigue, mysterious pain, and a bloating in her face and limbs that makeup could barely disguise. The official narrative says Jean was professional to the end, determined to complete the film despite her declining health. But the people who were actually there, the crew members who watched her stumble through takes, the costumers who had to continually let out her wardrobe, the hairdresser who saw her wince when the platinum bleach touched her scalp, they told different stories in private, stories that didn't emerge publicly until decades later, when the people involved were too old to care about studio retaliation. Jean knew something was catastrophically wrong with her body. She'd been asking to see doctors for weeks, but MGM's response was always the same: finish the film first, then take all the medical leave she needed. Just 2 more weeks of shooting. Just 10 more days. Just a few more scenes. Every promise of just a little longer was a lie designed to extract maximum value before the asset failed completely. Because that's what Jean had become by 1937. Not a person, but an asset. A revenue stream that MGM intended to drain dry before writing it off. Part 3. The day the camera caught truth. May 29, 1937. The set of Saratoga at MGM Studios. It should have been a routine day of filming, but something went wrong early. Jean arrived late, which was unusual. When she finally appeared, her face was pale despite the heavy makeup, and she was moving carefully, like someone whose body had become unfamiliar territory. The first scene they attempted was a simple dialogue exchange with Clark Gable. Jean forgot her lines 3 times, not in the way actors sometimes fumble. This was different. She would start a sentence and then stop mid-word, looking confused, as if the thoughts had simply evaporated from her mind. The director, Jack Conway, called for a break. During that break, something happened that wasn't supposed to, something that Donald Kemp, then a 19-year-old assistant cameraman, witnessed and secretly recorded. According to a statement Donald gave to a film historian in 2002, 6 years before his death, Jean asked if she could have a few minutes alone in front of the camera. She said she wanted to practice her lines without the pressure of the full crew watching. Conway agreed and cleared the set, leaving only essential technical personnel, including Donald, whose job was to operate the backup camera that ran continuously to catch behind-the-scenes footage for publicity purposes. But Jean didn't practice her lines. Instead, she sat down in front of the camera and began to talk. Really talk. Not as Jean Harlow the star, but as Harlean Carpenter, the woman who'd been erased and replaced. Donald's camera captured it all. Part 4. What the footage shows. The film that Donald Kemp preserved for 71 years is only 11 minutes long, damaged by time and amateur storage, with sections too degraded to view. But what remains is extraordinary and heartbreaking. Jean sits in a pool of harsh studio light, surrounded by darkness. She's wearing her costume from Saratoga, an elegant white dress that looks wrong on her now, too tight across her swollen midsection. Her platinum hair is styled perfectly, but her face is puffy, almost unrecognizable as the goddess from Red Dust or Dinner at 8. She speaks directly to the camera, her voice hoarse and strained. The audio is poor quality, and some sections are inaudible, but enough survives to reconstruct what she was trying to say. I don't know, "If anyone will ever see this," she begins. "I don't even know if I want anyone to see this, but I need to say it out loud, just once, while I still can." She talks about the exhaustion, the relentless schedule, the medications the studio doctors have been giving her. She names them specific compounds that medical experts who've reviewed the footage confirm were common in the 1930s, but are now known to cause kidney damage with prolonged use. "They tell me I'm fine," Jean says, her voice breaking. "They tell me I just need to rest, to take my medicine, to finish the picture. But I can feel my body shutting down. I can feel it, and nobody will listen." Then she says something that transforms the entire narrative of her death. "My mother won't let me go to a real hospital. She thinks prayer is enough, and the studio won't force her to, because if I'm not in a hospital, they can keep shooting. It's perfect for them. If I die, it's my mother's fault for being a Christian Scientist. They're protected. They're always protected." Part 5. The studio's calculation. What Jean was describing on that footage was a conspiracy of negligence. Multiple parties, whose interests aligned around keeping her working until she literally couldn't continue. MGM needed Saratoga completed. They'd invested heavily in the production, and Jean was the star. Without her, the film would have to be scrapped or reshot, costing hundreds of thousands of Depression-era dollars the studio couldn't afford to lose. Jean's mother, known as Mama Jean, was a devout Christian Scientist who genuinely believed that faith healing was superior to medical intervention. Her religious convictions made her an unwitting accomplice in the studio's strategy of delay. And Jean herself was trapped between them, too sick to fight her mother's religious authority, too contractually bound to defy the studio, too financially dependent to walk away. The footage shows Jean understanding all of this with perfect clarity. "They're using my mother's faith as a weapon," she says. "They know she won't put me in a hospital, so they don't have to. They can pretend they're respecting her beliefs while they're really just buying time to finish the film." She pauses, and tears are visible on her face, cutting tracks through the heavy makeup. "I'm going to die because nobody wants to lose money on me. That's the truth they'll never admit." Part 6. The collapse. Later that same day, May 29, 1937, Jean collapsed on set during filming. The official accounts say she fainted, was revived, and was sent home to rest under her mother's care. She wouldn't return to the hospital until June 6, by which time her condition had deteriorated so severely that death was inevitable. But Donald Kemp's account, corroborated by other crew members who spoke anonymously over the years, tells a different story. Jean didn't just faint. She had what appeared to be a seizure, her body convulsing, her breathing labored, her skin taking on a yellowish tint that indicated advanced kidney failure. The studio doctor was called to the set. He examined Jean briefly, then made a phone call, not to an ambulance, but to someone at MGM. Donald, who was close enough to overhear, heard the doctor say, "She's critical. We should hospitalize immediately." Then, after listening to whoever was on the other end, "Understood, I'll speak with the mother." What followed was a conversation between the studio doctor and Mama Jean, conducted out of earshot of most of the crew. But a script supervisor named Helen Morris later testified that she heard the doctor telling Mama Jean that Jean was simply overworked and overwrought, that hospitalization would be traumatic and unnecessary, and that what she really needed was rest, prayer, and her mother's loving care at home. He was prescribing death by delay, and he was doing it on MGM's orders. Part 7. The 8 Lost Days. From May 29 to June 6, 1937, Jean Harlow was dying at home in her mother's care. Mama Jean prayed over her daughter, administered Christian Science treatments, and refused to call for medical help. She believed she was saving her daughter's soul. She was actually watching her daughter's organs fail. According to unverified accounts from household staff who spoke to reporters years later, Jean was conscious for much of this time and repeatedly begged to go to a hospital. Mama Jean would respond that hospitals were places where people lost faith, where the body was treated but the spirit was abandoned. William Powell, Jean's fiancé, visited several times during this period. He later told friends, though never publicly, that he tried to convince Mama Jean to seek medical care, that he'd offered to pay for the best doctors in Los Angeles, that he'd threatened to call an ambulance himself. Mama Jean had him barred from the house, claiming he was undermining her daughter's spiritual healing. MGM, meanwhile, was in a state of calculated paralysis. They knew Jean was gravely ill, The studio doctor was filing regular reports, but they also knew that as long as she was in her mother's custody, they had plausible deniability. They weren't preventing her from seeking medical care. Her mother was. If questioned, they could claim they'd respected the family's religious autonomy. It was a perfect, legal, and moral shelter. And it cost Jean Harlow her life. Part 8. The hospital. Too late. By June 6, Jean had slipped into a semi-comatose state. Her skin was a grayish yellow, her breathing was shallow and irregular, and she was retaining so much fluid that she'd gained nearly 20 pounds in a week. Even Mama Jean couldn't deny reality anymore. Gina was rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital, where doctors confirmed what should have been treated a week earlier: complete kidney failure, uremic poisoning, cerebral edema. Her body was shutting down system by system, and there was nothing they could do except make her comfortable while she died. She lingered for about 30 hours, occasionally regaining consciousness. William Powell sat beside her bed for most of that time. According to a nurse who spoke to a biographer in 1965, Jean's last coherent words were directed at Powell: "Tell them I knew. Tell them I knew what they were doing." Powell never did tell them. He kept his silence about MGM's role in Jean's death for the rest of his life, dying in 1984 without ever publicly accusing the studio of negligent homicide. But privately, to close friends, he was less circumspect. "They killed her," he allegedly said. "They knew she was dying, and they chose to finish their film instead of saving her life. And her mother's religion gave them the perfect excuse." Part 9. The cover-up. Jean Harlow's death certificate lists the cause as uremic poisoning resulting from acute nephritis. The official narrative, promoted by MGM's publicity machine and accepted by most journalists, blamed Mama Jean's Christian Science beliefs for delaying proper medical treatment. This narrative served everyone's interests except the truth. MGM was positioned as a victim. They'd lost their biggest star due to a family's religious extremism. Mama Jean was vilified in some quarters, but protected in others by defenders of religious freedom, and Jean herself was transformed into a tragic figure whose death was the result of bad luck and bad theology, not corporate negligence. The footage Donald Kemp preserved. Jean's 11-minute confession remained hidden for 71 years. Donald never showed it to anyone during MGM's corporate lifetime. He never sold it, never leaked it, never even mentioned its existence publicly. Why? In a 2002 interview he explained, "I was 19 years old and terrified. MGM was the most powerful studio in Hollywood. If they knew I had that footage, they would have destroyed it and probably destroyed me too. So I kept it hidden, and as the years went by, everyone who could have been held accountable died. By the time I was old enough not to care about retaliation, I was also old enough to wonder if releasing it would accomplish anything except disturbing Jean's memory." Donald died with the footage still in his fireproof safe. His nephew, unaware of its significance, nearly destroyed it. Only by chance did it survive to be viewed by modern audiences, and even then, in limited, controlled circumstances. Part 10. The alternative history. Here's the question that haunts everyone who's seen Donald Kemp's footage. What would have happened if Jean had been hospitalized on May 29 when she first collapsed? Medical experts who've reviewed the timeline suggest her kidney failure might have been treatable if caught early enough. In 1937, dialysis wasn't yet available, but fluid management, blood transfusions, and other supportive treatments could sometimes reverse acute kidney damage if administered in time. If Jean had survived, if she'd recovered and completed Saratoga, would she have continued her career, or would the close brush with death have given her the leverage to finally escape MGM's control? We'll never know. But Donald's footage offers a glimpse of what Jean Harlow might have become if she'd been allowed to age, to evolve, to exist as something other than a platinum-haired goddess frozen at 26. In those 11 minutes, speaking directly to the camera without a script or a director, she's intelligent, self-aware, analytical. She understands the system that's destroying her and can articulate exactly how it works. That woman, the real Harleyan carpenter beneath the Jean Harlow construct, deserved to grow old. She deserved to become a producer, a director, a writer, whatever she wanted. She deserved to see what she could accomplish when she wasn't being systematically poisoned and exploited. MGM took that future from her, not with a gun or a knife, but with contracts and medications and calculated delays. They murdered her in slow motion, and they did it so skillfully that they were never held accountable. The final testimony. Donald Kemp's footage ends with Jean looking directly into the camera lens. Her eyes are red from crying, her makeup is destroyed, but her gaze is steady and clear. "If you're watching this," she says, "then I'm probably already dead, and if I am, please understand something. I didn't die from kidney failure. I died from a system that treated human beings like machinery, that squeezed every possible dollar out of us before discarding the wreckage. They killed me. Not quickly, not obviously, but they killed me just the same." She takes a breath, winces, whether from physical pain or emotional anguish. It's impossible to tell. "I don't know if knowing this will change anything. Probably it won't. The machinery will keep running, destroying new people in new ways, because that's what it's designed to do. But at least now there's a record. At least now someone besides me knows what happened." Then she leans forward, reaches out, and the footage goes black. She'd turned off the camera herself. 9 days later, she was dead. The unanswered questions. Donald Kemp's footage raises as many questions as it answers. How much did MGM executives know about Jean's condition? Were they explicitly told she was dying, or were they simply willfully ignorant? Did the studio doctor lie to Mama Jean on his own initiative, or was he following orders? We'll never have complete answers, because everyone directly involved is long dead. What we have is Jean's testimony, the only unfiltered, unscripted account of her final days, preserved by accident and luck. The footage has never been publicly released. It remains in the possession of a film archive that has declined to make it available, citing concerns about Jean's privacy and dignity. Critics argue that withholding it serves the same function as MGM's original cover-up, protecting powerful institutions at the expense of truth. But perhaps there's something else at play. Perhaps the archivists who've watched that footage understand that Jean Harlow deserves something she never had in life, the right to control her own narrative, to decide what parts of her story are shared and what parts remain private. She spoke into Donald Kemp's camera, not knowing if anyone would ever hear her. For 71 years, no one did. Now a handful of researchers and archivists carry the burden of her testimony, and they've chosen, for now, to keep it contained. The question that remains, so here's what we're left with. Jean Harlow, dying at 26, understood exactly what was being done to her. She documented it, and that documentation survived, against all odds, to reach us nearly a century later. The question isn't whether MGM killed her. The footage makes that clear enough. The question is what we do with that knowledge. Do we rewrite the histories that have valorized Hollywood's golden age? Do we acknowledge that the movies we love were made by people who were being systematically destroyed? Do we hold modern corporations accountable for the sins of their predecessors? Or do we do what Hollywood has always done, keep the comfortable story, bury the uncomfortable truth, and protect the machinery that creates our dreams by grinding up the people inside it? Jean Harlow looked into a camera and said, "They're killing me, and nobody will stop them." 71 years later, someone heard her. But hearing isn't the same as acting. Knowing isn't the same as changing. Donald Kemp kept that footage hidden for most of his life because he was afraid of what MGM would do to him if they knew it existed. MGM is gone now, absorbed into larger corporate entities that barely remember Jean Harlow existed. But the system that killed her, the system that treats performers as disposable assets, that prioritizes profit over survival, that constructs elaborate legal and moral shelters for negligent homicide, that system is still very much alive. Jean Harlow's last testament asks us a question we still haven't answered. How many more people have to die before we admit the machinery is broken? And even if we admit it, are we brave enough to dismantle it? The footage exists. The truth is preserved. But preservation isn't justice, and documentation isn't accountability. Jean Harlow is still waiting for someone to actually listen, not just to hear her words, but to act on them. 87 years and counting.